Moving on from mount, there's opt. This is a place where add-on software packages would be installed. Something that is not provided by your distribution of Linux. For example, OpenOffice for the longest time was traditionally installed in opt. You might find something like Oracle installed in opt. You can think of it similar to programs and files in a Windows world, but in Linux most things are provided by the distribution, so opt is not used as much. Proc, for example, though, is much different. It's very similar to dev in that it provides a file location for something that may not actually be a real file, in the sense that it doesn't reside on a hard drive. So if we take a look inside proc, there's a bunch of numbers here and directories. These are referring to running processes on the system as a whole. The first process to launch on any Unix system should be the init process. So if we just take a look inside here, we're going to find information about this specific process. For example, mount information, the mounts, status of it. This information is useful, but at the same time, if you're new to Linux, it may not be someplace where you should be playing. But it's useful to understand what proc is and what it represents. Moving on from proc, there's root. Root is the root user's home directory. It's not stored inside mount for two reasons. First one would be security. You don't want other users being able to access the root directory. Secondly, the home directory may be on a different partition, and the root user's home directory should be on the same partition as the root directory of the system. Because if you can only boot into single user mode and you're not able for whatever reason to mount the home directory, you still want to be able to log in correctly as the root user. We're going to take a brief look here. It's very similar to the BlueGeek 9 user, although you'll notice that there's not a desktop or documents folders already created for you. Moving on, there's sbin, or system binaries. This is very similar to the bin directory. The primary difference, though, is that sbin, or system binaries, have binary files that are only meant to be executed by the root user. So fdisk would be located here, along with formatting your hard drives, mkfs, whatever your file system would be, you would find here. Again, things that are placed inside sbin should be reserved for things used to recover your system. The rule of thumb, again, is if you can only boot into single user mode, if you need the utility and it can only be executed by root, it should be inside sbin. Then there's SRV, or service. The standard states that it should be data for services provided by the system. It doesn't provide much more detail than that, and as if you will notice, there aren't any files located inside here. The file system hierarchy standard doesn't state how it should be implemented or how it should be used, but only that this directory should exist. This system is compliant because it is here, but it doesn't make any use of it. Moving on from SRV, there's sys. Sys is not part of the file system hierarchy standard and is unique to the 2.6 Linux kernel. The sys directory provides a user interface into the internal workings of the kernel during runtime. It allows the user to change things like the disk I/O schedule of the kernel on the fly. The sys directory is not, I would say, it isn't complicated, but the explanation might be a bit involved and should be reserved for a subsequent video. Moving on from sys, there's temp, TMP. This is just a place to create temporary files. Anything inside here should be able to be deleted without risk of damaging anything on the system. Traditionally, when the system boots, it deletes everything out of here. Moving on from temp, we have USR, pronounced user or Universal System Resources. You'll notice that there's a bin, an sbin, in here, which is very similar to what we saw in the root partition. USR is the second hierarchy, the second layer on the hierarchy of the tri-hierarchy system. Things put in bin inside USR are going to be very similar to things put in bin in the root partition. They should be able to be executed by any user on the system. Just like sbin on the root partition, sbin inside USR should only be executable by the root user. These are things that are not considered essential, things that you would not need if the system is only able to boot into runtime. If we take a brief look here inside USR bin, we'll see some of the files. Now it should be mentioned that the reason why USR is a separate directory and there isn't everything all put inside bin or sbin is that this may not be stored on the same partition or even on the same machine. Your USR directory may be a network file system mount. Nowadays it's not that common, but it was before. For example, ALSA Mixer, which is for the Linux sound system on here. This is not something that would be considered essential. There are several files in here. USR tends to be a very large directory on most modern Linux installs. Moving on from USR, we go to var, which has variable data in here. You're going to find things in here like your mail spools. So for example, we have mail, and then there's spools or even temp files here as well. www, because there is an Apache server on this machine. This is where you'd be putting data if you're not, well, most programs are going to be putting data here, not users in particular, but it's traditionally where log files are placed. Things that are going to be either large or grow throughout the life of their existence are going to be put inside var. And then these are two symlinks which points to the initrd and the kernel of the system. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully it'll be the first of many to come.